Lucia Harper stepped off the last bus of the day, the November wind cutting through her worn coat and sending a shiver down her spine. The cold carried with it memories she had tried hard to bury of standing outside the office door of her old school, where she had once been a child psychologist. But tonight, there were no students, no whiteboards, no notebooks, only a massive farmhouse, sitting alone like an unhealed wound in the middle of a field of brittle yellow grass. Silas Wexler didn't come to greet her. An older woman with silver hair and guarded eyes opened the door. "You're Harper?" she asked. "I'm Mrs. Kersey, the head housekeeper. Mr. Wexler doesn't tolerate tardiness. Next time, be early." Lucia nodded silently and followed her inside. Every footstep echoed down the vast wooden hallway, each sound a question, whispering in her head. What am I doing here? A housemaid? After everything? But the money was gone, and she needed to survive. Her job was simple at first. Laundry, cleaning, preparing guest rooms, no interaction with the children. That was the rule. But that changed on the third night. A loud crash sounded from upstairs. Lucia reacted instinctively, bolting up the stairs. Rose, 8 years old, was screaming, hurling a chair against the wall. Noah, 6, sat curled in the corner, hands pressed over his ears, eyes hollow and blank. None of the staff moved. Not one. Lucia stepped into the room. "It's okay. It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered gently, crouching down, her hand slowly reaching toward Noah. He didn't flinch, but he didn't pull away. Rose ran at her, punching her shoulder. "You're not supposed to be in here. You're a fake." Lucia didn't resist. She dropped to her knees, arms opening to embrace both of them. No words. Just the sound of 3 heartbeats. Slowly, sinking. 10 minutes passed, then 30. An hour. Rose stopped thrashing. Noah rested his head on Lucia's shoulder, and for the first time in 3 months, he fell asleep. The next morning, Silas walked into that room. He froze, as if struck by lightning. Lucia was asleep on the floor. Rose lay with her head resting on Lucia's lap, Noah's arms wrapped tightly around her neck like a lifeline. But Silas wasn't moved. He was angry. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Who told you you could enter their room?" Lucia stirred, slowly waking. She didn't defend herself. She simply looked into the sunken shadows beneath Silas's eyes, then reached down and scribbled something on a napkin by the bed. "I didn't intrude. I stayed because they called me by name." And then she left. No shouting, no explanation, just silence. But the door, which had remained shut for months, was left open when she walked through it. Noah noticed that first. Silas said nothing, but he didn't sleep that night. Instead, he watched the camera footage over and over. The moment Rose's tears fell onto Lucia's shoulder, the way Noah leaned into her, drifting off without medication for the first time in months. And in that moment, within the quiet shadows of his heart, Silas finally understood. She hadn't trespassed. She had been called in. The December wind swept through the Wexler farm as if trying to scrub away the traces of the woman who had just left. Lucia hadn't left much behind. Just a linen coat with a frayed hem, a notebook filled with doodles in the margins, and the faint scent of vanilla still lingering on the sofa where she used to sit reading while waiting for laundry to finish. But it was her absence that made the house feel colder than ever. Silas said nothing to the staff. He didn't explain why Lucia had left so suddenly. He gave no orders to replace her. He left everything untouched, like a man who's lost something precious, but can't yet admit it's gone. Noah couldn't sleep again. Rose was unnaturally silent. She didn't lash out, didn't scream, didn't toss her books down the staircase anymore. She just stared out the window. Quiet. At dinner, she said something that made the entire table fall still, as if someone had pulled the power from the room. Miss Lucia said sleep was like a soft blanket. "Now I feel cold." Noah stopped mid-spoonful and shook his head softly. No one spoke. Mrs. Kersey looked down, her hands clenched in her apron. The young maid began crying at the table. Silas just sat there, fingers tightening around his wineglass, eyes fixed on the space across from him, as if willing a shadow to return. That night, he went to his study and watched the camera footage. Frame by frame, Lucia, sitting on the floor, arms around Noah, her gaze alert but unwavering. Lucia dabbed Rose's bloody nose with a tissue, not leaving even when cursed. Lucia whispered something the camera couldn't record, but the look in the children's eyes had been captured. For the first time since his wife's funeral, Silas cried. No wine. No music. No witnesses. The next morning, he entered the children's room with a breakfast tray. Soft-boiled eggs and fresh orange juice, Noah's favorite. The boy turned his back. Rose looked at her father, not with anger, but with emptiness. She's gone, isn't she? Silas nodded. What did you do? Her voice broke mid-sentence. Not from fear, but from helplessness. He couldn't answer. He just set the tray down and said softly, I'll fix it. That very afternoon, he drove into town for the first time since his wife died. He passed diners, gas stations, the library, even the old abandoned church, searching for any trace of Lucia Harper. No one knew, or maybe they did, but chose silence. At a small train station, the ticket clerk remembered a black woman with a canvas bag and a thin scarf, asking about the earliest train to Burlington. She didn't board, waited for over an hour, then left, headed toward the marketplace outside of town. Silas followed, piecing together her trail like fragments of a broken memory. Finally, he saw her, wearing a janitor's uniform at the station, gloves on, cleaning the windshield glass with diluted cleaner. Her back was slightly hunched, but her steps were steady. He didn't call out. He just stood and watched. It wasn't until the wind blew her scarf off that she turned around. Their eyes met. Lucia froze, scarf in hand, unsure whether to grasp it or let it go. They called your name, Silas said at last. His voice no longer held the cold command of a man used to control, but trembled gently like a father unsure he deserved to be one. Lucia said nothing. He pulled a small piece of paper from his coat. A pencil sketch. Crude lines, but unmistakable. A woman hugging two children beneath a slanted roof. At the bottom, scribbled in uneven handwriting, Miss Lucia is the voice in my head. Noah had written it, by hand. No coercion. No practice. Just instinct. Lucia took the drawing. Her hand trembled slightly, but she said nothing. Silas lowered his voice. If I asked you to come back not as staff, but as family, what would you say? Lucia looked at him for a long time, then turned away toward the station benches. I don't want charity. I want truth. Silas nodded. Then come home. We need you. She didn't answer right away, but the next morning, Noah woke to the clatter of pans downstairs, the scent of toasted bread in the air, and Rose's voice echoing up the stairs. Miss Lucia's making warm milk, and for the first time, the little boy smiled. Lucia returned without announcement. She appeared one foggy morning, wearing her old coat now freshly washed and her hair neatly tied back. She didn't walk through the door like a housemaid. She entered like someone once exiled from the very place that had welcomed her, and this time, no one dared send her away. She didn't say much, just set down her bag, unwrapped her scarf and asked, "Where's the kitchen? Fried or boiled eggs this morning?" Noah ran to her without a word, wrapping his arms around her waist, like he'd never let go. Rose quietly pulled out a chair for Lucia, placed a warm glass of milk at her spot, and said, for the first time, "No one else here understands my dreams the way you do." Silas sat at the head of the table. No laptop, no buzzing phone. He looked at Lucia like a man staring at something he hadn't yet figured out, only sure he couldn't afford to lose it again. He spoke, plain and soft, like a confession. I was wrong. I didn't know what it took to make someone stay until I pushed them away. Lucia didn't respond. She just shook her head gently. "You don't have to make me stay. Just let me." And so they began. Not with promises, but with action. Lucia proposed creating a set of family rules not written by adults, but thought up by Rose and Noah themselves. "If this is your home," she said, "then you need to know what it feels like to be heard." They sat around the kitchen table, each holding a colored marker. The blank sheet taped to the refrigerator quickly filled with scribbled lines childlike, yet astonishingly wise. "No yelling at each other, even when we're scared. Grown-ups must say sorry when they're wrong. Don't make someone hug if they don't want to. One meal a week with no phones allowed. If someone cries, no one walks away first." Lucia added a quiet line at the bottom. "No one leaves without saying goodbye." Silas stared at that line for a long time. After breakfast, he stayed in the kitchen alone. He picked up a black pen and added a line beneath hers. "Tidy and firm. Learn how to say sorry, and learn how to live with not being forgiven right away." That afternoon, they cleaned out Lucia's old room. It wasn't the staff room anymore. New bed, new rug, a framed drawing by Noah hung on the wall. A house, 3 people, and sunlight pouring through a window. Lucia teared up. She wasn't someone who cried easily, but in that moment, as she touched the pillow, she pressed her lips together to keep from breaking. Not because she was happy, but because she feared this joy might not last. That night, Rose knocked on her door. "Are you scared?" the girl asked. Lucia smiled. "Scared of what?" "Next time, if they ask you to leave again." Lucia sat beside the bed and pulled Rose into her arms. "I'm scared, but if we live only by that fear, we'll never dare to love anyone again." Rose didn't answer, but as she closed her eyes to sleep, her lips moved in a whisper. "You're the reason I still believe someone won't leave." Silas heard the words from the crack in the hallway. He didn't go in. He just stood there, silent, like a wall melting from the inside. 3 days later, the local newspaper ran a story about a nearby children's care center where Lucia had once worked. A familiar name resurfaced, tied to a 2-year-old tragedy. A student who had died by suicide after sending a cry for help that went unanswered. Lucia Harper's name appeared under the headline, "Former counselor, no longer active in the education field." Silas read the article, eyes fixed on the line. His chest tightened. He wasn't sure if it was worry, fear, or doubt. He folded the paper and set it down on the kitchen table. Said nothing. That evening, Lucia found the newspaper. She wasn't surprised. She simply pulled out a chair and sat down. No avoidance, no defense. When Rose happened to catch sight of the bold headline, her breath grew short. They said you left someone behind?" Lucia nodded. "I didn't respond fast enough. Not because I didn't care, but because someone told me to stay silent." Noah took her hand. "You're still here. For us. No one's telling you to be quiet anymore." Lucia looked at the 2 children, her gaze softening. "This time, I'm staying. No matter what anyone says, I won't leave unless you ask me to." From the staircase, Silas heard every word. And in that moment, he understood. The past, no matter how heavy, doesn't have to be a chain if someone chooses to keep walking forward. And right then, not because of any apology, not because a reputation had been cleared, but because Lucia refused to hide from her darkness, Silas knew one thing. She was no longer the help. She was the one who stayed. Rumors spread like dry fire across the fields. One unverified article from a national online outlet was enough to make the Wexler farm the center of a storm. The headline screamed, "Woman tied to student death now caring for millionaire's children." The subhead hit harder, "Emotional manipulation or redemption?" The silent dismissal of a disgraced counselor. Lucia read it in silence. She didn't turn off the screen. She didn't unplug the internet. She just stared at the words that had grown so familiar they barely stung anymore. Irresponsible, professionally unfit, internally suspended, inappropriate emotional boundaries with minors. Rose read it next. The girl was so furious that she slammed the laptop to the floor and broke into uncontrollable sobs. They don't know anything. I want to go online. I want to tell the whole world she saved me. Lucia pulled her close and held her tight. Not everyone is ready to hear the truth, sweetheart. Noah didn't speak. He drew. All afternoon, he drew black and white sketches, each with one detail in color. The eyes. Lucia's eyes. Rose's. Silas's. His own. All looking at each other. All connected across the pages. The storm wasn't just media. 2 days later, a surprise inspection was ordered by the State Child Services Department. Rumors had surfaced that Silas Wexler, mentally unfit after his wife's death, had handed over responsibility for his children to someone legally unqualified. That perhaps, just perhaps, this billionaire father had been emotionally manipulated. Lucia didn't defend herself. She prepared everything: old records, incident reports from 2 years ago, internal complaints she had filed but never received a response. But Silas wasn't going to let this unfold by protocol. For the first time since his wife's funeral, he held a press conference right on the front porch of the farm. No backdrop, no lighting crew, a weathered wooden awning, a few folding chairs, and 2 children seated behind him. You ask me why I entrust my children to someone like Lucia Harper? He began new notes, new PR team. Because for the first time in his life, my son sleeps through the night without waking in fear. Because my daughter, once frozen by trauma, smiles when she sees her. Because I, someone who believed money could buy anything, learned that it cannot buy my children's sense of safety when Lucia walks into a room. She didn't heal them with medication or therapy plans. She stayed when others walked away. His voice wasn't loud, but the silence was unanimous. Cameras clicked. Live streams began. A reporter asked, "So are you denying any wrongdoing in Miss Harper's past?" Silas turned to look at Lucia, then back to the crowd. "I don't deny it. I respect people who face their mistakes. I won't accept a world that demands perfection as the price for forgiveness." Lucia stood behind him, gripping the table's edge until her knuckles turned white. She never asked to be defended. But hearing him, the man who once cast her out without a single word of thanks, now stand before the country and defend her, that felt more overwhelming than any humiliation. It was grace. Rose took a pair of scissors and cut up the morning newspaper that night. She glued the fragments into a strange, beautiful collage. In the center, she drew a heart. Inside, she wrote, "Miss Lucia is the one who stays." The next morning, during a live-streamed interview, a reporter asked Lucia, "If you could go back, would you do anything differently?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes, I would learn to trust my voice sooner. I wouldn't let people silence a child's cry just to protect someone's reputation." Viewers weren't just moved. They shared her words, quoted her, called her the keeper of silent children's flames. Letters poured in from parents of depressed teens. Emails arrived from former students. Lucia had once counseled some she'd only met for a few sessions. And among all the noise, one handwritten letter arrived at the farm. It was from the mother of the student who had died. In her letter she wrote, "I was angry at you. I needed someone to blame. But now I understand. My son didn't need a perfect person. He needed someone brave enough to stay. Thank you for doing that for other children." Lucia cried. For the first time, not out of pain, not out of shame, but from the release. Silas entered the room and found her hunched over the letter. He said nothing. He simply sat beside her, placed a hand gently on her back. No words were needed, because in that moment, silence was sacred. Winter in Vermont was entering its final freeze before making way for spring. Snow dusted the roof of the farmhouse. But inside Lucia Harper, a different kind of storm was stirring one, not ignited by the media or public doubt, but by a name she had buried deep for nearly 20 years. Russell Harper, her biological father, the man who vanished from her and her mother's lives when she was just 8, and who, without warning, reappeared one late afternoon, standing outside the farmhouse gate, his hair silver, his eyes heavy with remorse. He didn't knock. He just stood there, hands deep in his coat pockets. And when Silas opened the gate, the man spoke only one line, "I'm the one she never forgave." Lucia saw him from the second-floor balcony. Her heart tightened, like someone had grabbed it with both hands. Not from fear, but from not knowing if she still had the strength to face him. She had helped Rose heal, walked beside Noah, and faced the weight of public judgment. But the man in front of her, he was the reason she learned to protect herself through silence. The first to teach her that family could leave without a goodbye. Silas didn't push her. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and said softly, "Only if you're ready." Lucia walked downstairs. Not fast, not slow. She opened the door, stepped into the yard, and faced the man she had feared seeing her whole life. Russell looked at her. His eyes were red, but he didn't move closer. "Lucia, my little girl." She cut him off. "I'm not that girl anymore." He nodded. "I know, and I also know I don't deserve to hear you call me that again." They stood in silence. The wind passed through, carrying the soft chime of the porch wind bell. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said. I saw the news. I saw your name. I wasn't there when you needed someone back then. So I thought maybe at the very least, I could show up. This time, Lucia clenched her fists inside her coat pockets. "You think just showing up is enough?" Russell lowered his head. "Number. But sometimes, showing up is the only thing left when we've missed too many chances." She turned to walk away, but Noah had stepped outside. He didn't say a word, just looked at her. Then at the stranger. Rose followed, holding the collage she'd made from torn newspaper clippings, the one with the heart in the middle. She held it up to Lucia and said, "I think everyone deserves a second chance. If you don't give him one, then maybe you're just teaching us slogans, not truth." Lucia froze. That sentence from the very child she once held through sobs when the girl thought her parents didn't love her. It was a mirror reflecting everything Lucia had always believed. That healing doesn't come from being proven right. It comes from choosing to open the door even just once more. She turned around. "Come inside. It's cold." They said nothing more that day. Russell slept on the living room couch. Noah handed him the warmest blanket in the house. Just as Lucia had taught her, Rose made him a cup of cinnamon cocoa. The next morning, in the warm kitchen, Russell spoke. No excuses. No spin. He spoke of what it meant to be a terrified young father. The depression that came after an injury cost him his job and sense of purpose. He walked away because he believed staying would only hurt Lucia and her mother more. He confessed that he had watched her from afar on screens, in school speeches, and public videos, but he'd never dared to reach out. Not until he saw her being dragged through public shame by people who didn't know her story. "You don't have to forgive me, but if you're teaching children what it means to stay, then, please, let me sit beside you, just once." Lucia looked up at him. There was no more rage, no fresh wound, just a space inside her that she knew couldn't be filled by blame anymore. "Then sit," she said, "but don't stay silent like before." 3 days later, Lucia stood before a packed auditorium, a panel on emotional education. This time, she wasn't representing a school or an institution. She told her own story. No dramatization, no heroism, just the journey of a child who was once left behind and grew into a woman who decided not to leave others. We don't need to be perfect to stay. We just need the courage not to walk away when things get uncomfortable. She paused. Her eyes landed on the front row. Rose and Noah sat side by side, the little framed collage between their hands. Russell was in the row behind them, his hands trembling but steady. Silas stood in the back, eyes fixed on her, unmoving. "And if you ask me what a miracle is," Lucia said with a soft smile, "I can only say, staying is the miracle." The entire hall rose in applause. Not because Lucia was extraordinary, but because they saw themselves in the broken pieces she had carried and mended, not hidden, not denied. And when the talk ended, Noah ran onto the stage and hugged her tightly, whispering, "This time, you stayed because you wanted to, not because we needed you." Lucia held him close. Tears fell, not from closure, but because she knew, this time, she was beginning again, right from the doorstep she was once cast out of.